I'm Kai and I'm here with ClassroomNomads.com. Today our classroom is the second biggest temple in the world, in Karnak in Luxor. I'm reporting on the daily life of ancient Egyptians. The daily life of ancient Egyptians was shockingly similar to many lifestyles today, and in some cases arguably better. These people were the most powerful nation at a crucial period of time in history, and set the stage for generations to come. Not just in Egypt, but all around the world. In the golden age of this powerful nation, the people lived like those who would come ages after their time, and defined the words resourceful and adaptation, somehow managing not only to live, but to thrive in a land of almost complete desert. In ancient Egypt, much of life revolved around the family. Most people married at a very young age, much like in colonial America and Britain. Unlike in these later nations, most marriages were polygamous, meaning the husband would have several wives at once. In these situations, there would be one wife who was the boss of all the rest. Divorce was possible, but very rare because marriage was considered holy. Instead, the husband would simply marry again while keeping the original wife as well. Because the Egyptian men often had several wives, they usually also had many children. Children were thought to be a gift from the gods, especially in the royal family where they would grow up to become kings and queens. Many hieroglyphics and sculptures depict scenes of close bonds between parents and children, and it wasn't uncommon for pharaohs to build their wives and or children a pyramid next to their own. Unfortunately, not everyone who was a pharaoh who could have a pyramid built at the snap of a finger. The average person was a peasant whose life depended on the annual flood of the Nile to carry silt into farms and make them fertile enough to plant in. Grain grew best in such farms, especially wheat, so that's what they grew and ate. Their meals consisted mostly of bread, supplemented by a few vegetables. Meat was rare and expensive, and therefore mainly reserved for the very rich. The ancient Egyptians drank beer almost more than water, because the water from the Nile was dirty and could make you sick. Wine existed, but again was mainly reserved for the extravagant nobleman because of its lack of ubiquity and its expense. Why were noblemen so rich? As usual, the system was corrupt, and taxes imposed upon peasants fueled the parties of the upper class. Because of these taxes, it was extremely unlikely for someone born a peasant to ever rise above his or her class. Life wasn't as hard as it could be, though. Egyptians invented the ox-drawn plow, which made farming much more efficient and less straining. They also had slaves, but historians debate whether or not the slaves played a role more like servants, or if their lives were closer to the lives of the Africans brought to serve on plantations in colonial America. In many old civilizations, and still in some places today, women were, and sometimes still are, considered barely a level above slave. In ancient Egypt, though, they were considered nearly equal to men. One woman could not have several husbands, but she could own property, testify in court, and conduct business dealings, as well as become head of the household if the husband was away or dead and she had no sons, or if they were not yet of age. Several times, when there was no male descendant of the pharaoh, a woman would take pharaohship, the most famous of these instances being Queen Cleopatra's rule. Although women were treated better in Egypt than in other civilizations, men were still considered heads of households and were expected to be obeyed when they gave an order. While a married woman's duty was usually caring for children, preparing food, and cleaning in general, the men usually worked in fields, although some were craftsmen. Life in ancient Egypt circled around the home, but what was the home? The average shelter was made of adobe brick, with 2- or 3-story townhouses for peasants, and larger homes for noblemen. The first floor of the peasants' homes were usually reserved for business, and the top floors for living. A nobleman's house, meanwhile, was divided into 3 sections: a reception area, a hall, and private quarters. Since these dwellings had no plumbing, sewage was thrown into rivers, pits, and sometimes even the street. As you probably guessed, this wasn't the healthiest form of disposal. The Egyptians weren't worried, though. They believed if somebody got sick, it was the will of the gods. They spent much of their time praying to their gods in the many temples that they built, which still stand today. The Egyptians were polytheistic, meaning they worshipped more than one god. Towns, villages, and cities tended to pick one god in particular that they worshipped more than others. For instance, Cairo might respect Osiris, the god of the dead, while Aswan thought his wife, Isis, was more powerful. The Egyptians didn't spend all their time in the temple, though, or in the fields. A large part of Egyptian culture was entertainment. Most of the entertainment had to do with the Nile. They enjoyed hunting water beasts like hippos and crocodiles, participating in swimming races, and playing boat games. They also had team sports like rowing and hockey that we still use today. Not everything was on the Nile, though. Children played with toys carved of wood and made of plant fibers. They had board games, music, festivals, and extravagant parties for the rich, too. One of the most widespread extreme problems with parties is one known to almost every teen alive. What should you wear to it? The Egyptians had no less trying options to decide when it came to this question. They wore light, cool linen embroidered with hand-stitched beautiful patterns for parties, and more plain, practical linen draped around them for work in the fields. The jewelry they wore was beautiful, too. Intricate bracelets, necklaces, earrings, and other medium-priced jewelry hung from the necks, wrists, and ears of the common folk, while wealthy had neck fringes of beautiful beads and precious jewels, and were adorned with the same decorations, but more intricate and made of more expensive materials, like gold instead of copper. Since the time of the ancient Egyptians, we've obviously made many technological advances, but given what they had and where they were, it's incredible that the Egyptians were as great as they were. That's all for ClassroomNomads.com. Thanks for tuning in.